Yorkshire, 1823. Sophie knew every corridor of Harwick Hall, not out of fondness but out of sheer necessity. She had learned that a silent duchess drew less attention and that walking with an air of purpose offered some protection from the loneliness that breathed through those stone walls. But on that April afternoon, no sense of purpose would be enough to save her. She left Oliver's study, with her hands gripping the folds of her navy blue velvet skirt, her cheeks burning. His voice, cold, measured, devastatingly calm, still echoed inside her like a deliberate strike. "I fail to understand your insistence on involving yourself in matters that do not concern you. Your presence at my side, when requested, is more than sufficient." She crossed the corridor without noticing the servants who stepped quickly out of her path. None dared stop her. Over the past year, they had learned that defying the Duchess, especially after she emerged from the Duke's study, was unwise. Her steps carried her to the stables, the only place where the scent of hay granted her a fleeting, almost childlike relief. "Saddle Briar," she said to the stable boy, her voice steady despite the tremor beneath it. "Please, Timothy." Quickly. She seized the stirrup and mounted before he could assist her, not out of skill but out of desperation. She set off at a gallop, riding side saddle. The cutting wind pulled tears from her eyes, though none were born of speed. Better the wind than the suffocating air of Harwick Hall. Better the emptiness of the road than the emptiness beside him. She rode without direction, only away from him, from the words, from the role of a living shadow. Her tears blurred the world. She didn't notice when she crossed into the closed-off part of the woods, where brambles drooped from branches like dark veils, nor did she see the thorned limb jutting from the old oak. Pain slashed across her face like a burning blade. The impact stole her breath. Briar reared. Sophie lost the reins, lost her balance, and fell. Her body hit the damp ground hard. Her head struck an exposed root. One final thought, one silent wish for the pain to stop, flickered through her mind. And then the darkness took her. Briar bolted with a frightened cry. The forest fell still. Sophie remained where she had fallen, motionless, blood streaking her cheek as the sky darkened, and the first drops of rain began to fall. Forgotten, just as she had always feared. Before we continue Sophie and Oliver's story, leave a like if this tale has already touched your heart. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any of our stories, and tell me in the comments, from which city and country are you watching us? I love knowing how far our tales travel. Now enjoy the rest of today's story. Sophie Harwick, née Kenley, became a duchess at 21 through an arrangement between families. Her father, a modestly endowed earl, saw in the marriage a solution to long-standing debts. She, however, saw hope, perhaps naive, but earnest. 2 years later, that hope had withered like flowers left too long in the shade. Oliver Harwick, Duke of Harwick, was everything expected of an English aristocrat, educated, disciplined, impeccable in manner. He managed his estates with precision, fulfilled every social duty without fault, and treated his wife with a courtesy so flawless it felt distant. He was not cruel. He never raised his voice. He simply never seemed to see her, not fully, as though Sophie were just another piece of the elegant furniture of Harwick Hall. Their marriage had settled into a quiet arrangement, restrained dinners, lukewarm conversations about the weather, separate bedrooms, and expectations buried deep. Sophie had tried to believe that time would be enough for him to notice her, but time only deepened the silence. She sought refuge where she could, in books, in the gardens, and most of all, in the discreet rides across the estate lands. The habit was tolerated only because it stayed far from the eyes of a society eager to judge. Out there, among trees and wind, she could breathe without weighing every gesture. The servants knew this routine. They knew that when the air of Harwick Hall grew too heavy, the Duchess would saddle Briar and vanish for hours. She always returned calmer, more gathered, more capable of bearing the burden of being unseen in her own home. But on that April afternoon, something would break for good. Because Sophie would not return the same, and Oliver Harwick, the Duke who had never allowed emotion to dent his armor, would discover that certain losses can turn even the most unyielding men into desperate ones. Chapter 1. The Weight of Silence. Oliver had remained in his study for hours after Sophie left. The columns of numbers no longer made sense, yet he kept his eyes fixed on them, as if work alone might bury the unease spreading through him, as it always had. The afternoon light was fading when someone knocked. "Come in," he murmured, without lifting his gaze. Mrs. Holloway entered with measured steps. The rigid way she held herself made his brow tighten. "Has something happened? Forgive the intrusion, Your Grace, but—" The housekeeper's voice faltered. "The Duchess has not returned." Oliver finally looked up. "What do you mean?" "She went out riding shortly after leaving your study. That was nearly 3 hours ago. Timothy is worried. The rain is getting heavier and Her Grace never stays out past dusk." 3 hours. Sophie, alone, after what he had said. Something sharp tore through his chest, a dry, unexpected jolt, and he stood so abruptly his chair nearly toppled. "Tell Timothy to ready my horse, now, and gather every able man, lanterns, ropes, anything we have." Mrs. Holloway nodded once and hurried down the corridor. Oliver followed her, the house erupting around him, running footsteps, raised voices, doors slamming open, yet he kept going without a coat, without gloves, without the composure that had always been his armor. Even he was startled by the fierce urgency burning under his skin. It had been so long since he'd felt anything like it that he barely recognized his own body. In the stables, Timothy was already fastening the saddle onto the black stallion. 3 other men were mounting in tense silence: Harlan, the head steward, Paul, the gardener, and a red-haired boy trembling more from fear of the Duke than from the storm. "She rode east, Your Grace, as she always does when—" Timothy hesitated. Oliver understood, and waited for nothing more. He mounted in one swift motion and shot forward into the thickening rain. The men followed with swinging lanterns, their yellow light fighting the wind. "Your Grace, mind the ground," Harlan called behind him. But Oliver rode as though his own life depended on speed. "Sophie," he shouted, trying to cut through the roar of the storm. Only the wind answered. The group spread out behind him, scattering through the woods in a wide formation. Lanterns flickered between trunks, voices called her name, branches snapped under frantic hooves. Oliver pushed deeper, into her refuge, where the oaks arched overhead like a great cathedral, until something broke through the darkness. Briar, alone, shaking, his reins dragging. The world froze around him. "Lord Harwick!" someone shouted, but Oliver was already dismounting before the stallion had even stopped. Mud rose around his ankles as he ran, calling, "Sophie!" Sophie. He saw the navy velvet first, caught in the dark leaves, then her still hand, and then her face. He dropped to his knees. Blood mingled with the rain, tracing the cuts along her brow, her eyelids, the delicate face he had always seen from afar, never truly seen at all. Her chest rose and fell in a rhythm far too weak. "No." His voice broke for the first time in years. "Not like this?" 2 of the men reached him and halted, struck silent by the sight. With hands he barely recognized as his own, he removed his cloak and wrapped it around her. She was light, far too light, and cold beneath the relentless rain. "Sophie, please," he whispered into her soaked hair, "don't close your eyes to me. Not today." She didn't respond. He lifted her into his arms, so light she felt made of air, and staggered a few steps toward his horse. But with the heavy rain and slick ground, he knew he couldn't mount with her alone. Harlan stepped forward at once. "Let me help, Your Grace." Oliver didn't answer, only nodded, jaw locked tight. Harlan steadied the horse while Timothy came to the other side. Together they raised Sophie with utmost care. Oliver mounted first, settling into the saddle, and then the men passed her up to him, supporting her shoulders and legs until she rested safely against his chest. His arms closed around her instantly, shielding her as if the smallest jolt might harm her further. "Hold her tight, my lord," Timothy said, breathless. "I won't let her go," Oliver replied, his voice low, almost a vow. He seized the reins. The stallion surged forward through the storm, and Oliver rode back toward Harwick Hall as though time itself were collapsing behind them. When they reached the estate, the courtyard was alive with movement. Lights, voices, towels, the housekeeper calling for the doctor. But Oliver didn't allow anyone to take Sophie from his arms. He climbed the stairs, pushed open the door to her room, a place he had entered only a handful of times in 2 years of marriage, and laid her down with trembling hands. "Send for Dr. Whitmore," he commanded, voice rough. "Now." He stood there, unmoving beside the bed, staring at the wounded face of the woman who had lived so close to him and yet so far. And only then, with brutal clarity, did he understand that what consumed him was not just guilt. It was fear. A devastating fear of losing her before he ever understood how much she meant. Chapter 2. When Darkness Settles. Oliver had never known what it meant to wait. He had spent a lifetime commanding, estates, servants, decisions. Time bent to his routine, never the other way around. Meetings began when he entered. Dinners were served when he sat. Invitations adjusted to his convenience. But now, seated in a chair beside Sophie's bed, he discovered that time could be a slow form of punishment. Hours had crawled by since he brought her home. Hours filled only with the rain against the windows and Sophie's painfully fragile breaths. Mrs. Holloway had cleaned her face, leaving blood-stained cloths soaking in a bowl beside the bed, stains that clung to the water the same way the memory of what had happened seemed to cling to Sophie's skin. The wounds looked worse in the soft light. Lines of dried blood cut across her face, the swelling, distorted features he had never truly examined up close. Tiny thorns, which Dr. Whitmore removed one by one with a silver tweezer, were still lodged in the skin around her eyes. Each one the doctor pulled felt to Oliver as though it pierced him as well. She didn't wake. "A serious blow to the head," Dr. Whitmore said, shutting his worn leather case. "The fall was violent. And the injuries to her face are significant, Your Grace." Oliver didn't move. He waited, needed something, anything to undo the dread solidifying inside him. The doctor continued gently. "Beyond the cuts, she suffered other impacts. Her left ankle is badly swollen, a severe sprain, possibly a small fracture. It will be painful when she wakes. There are also extensive bruises on her hip and ribs. Her breathing was unsteady when I arrived, which suggests a contusion." Oliver felt his stomach sink. "And her eyes?" he asked, voice low, strained. The doctor hesitated, an unusual sign. "The eyelids were deeply cut by the thorns. There is risk of infection, and if the more delicate parts of the eye were affected, her vision may be compromised." The floor seemed to shift beneath him. "What?" "I can't say anything with certainty until she wakes," the doctor answered patiently. "The body withdraws after such a shock. She may wake in a few hours or only tomorrow. Until then, keep the room dim. Any bright light will cause pain. A fever may also come. She was far too long in the rain." When the doctor left, silence settled over the room again. A living, merciless silence that seemed to watch every fragile breath she took. Oliver looked at his own hands, hands that signed contracts, managed lands, lifted glasses at hollow dinners, hands that had rarely ever touched hers. Now they trembled. The afternoon returned to him like a blow. Sophie entering his study, hesitant, holding reports on the village school. Speaking of the children, of water leaking through the roof, of how important it was to help. And he, never lifting his eyes. Then the sentence, so sharp that it now cut inward. "Your presence at my side, when requested, is more than sufficient." He pressed a hand to the window frame, bracing himself as if the world were shifting beneath him. She had left because of him, had ridden with tears he never saw, had fallen, torn her face, injured her body, might lose her vision, because of him. And for the first time in years, the Duke of Harwick had no answer for himself. Only guilt, only fear, only the echo of what he had done. His hands pressed harder against the sill. He had never been a man of faith, went to church out of tradition, not devotion. But that night, he prayed. He prayed with the desperate urgency of someone who finally understood the damage he carried on his own shoulders. And then, the silence broke. A sound, a faint groan. Oliver turned so quickly he nearly stumbled. In seconds he was at her side, kneeling. "Sophie?" His voice was almost unrecognizable. "Sophie, can you hear me?" She drew a deeper breath, weak, uneven, and her body shifted beneath the blankets for the briefest moment. Her bandaged eyelids trembled, not in an attempt to open, but as an involuntary reflex. "Oliver?" she whispered. Not a call, not clear recognition, just a lost question drifting through the dark. He took her hand in his first true gesture of closeness in 2 years, and the coldness of her fingers struck him like a blow. "I'm here," he murmured, and his voice sounded like nothing he had ever spoken. "I'm not leaving. You're safe." She tried to move her head, but only managed a soft cry. Her body would not obey. Her breathing faltered. It was clear she barely had consciousness at all. "It's so dark," she whispered, not in fear, but as though describing a bad dream rather than reality. Oliver trembled. She wasn't saying it out of despair. She didn't even understand what was happening. "Shh." He touched her cheek with extreme care, tracing around the bandages without brushing the wounds. "You need to rest. The doctor warned us. Don't strain yourself. Just rest." She murmured something, a sound more than words, and then in a thread of a voice that barely existed, "It was my fault. I shouldn't have bothered you." The blow struck straight through him. "No." The word escaped, crushed, almost a plea. "It wasn't your fault, it was mine, all mine." But Sophie was already slipping back into unconsciousness, her body softening, her hand growing still between his. Those words, that apology she should never have spoken, faded along with her. Oliver remained beside the bed, holding her hand as if it were the single fixed point in a collapsing world. And for the first time in as long as he could remember, he allowed himself to truly look at Sophie. He noticed the delicate curve of her chin, the way her dark hair loosened across the pillow, the frailty of the hands he had barely touched in 2 years. Every detail he had failed to see, not for lack of opportunity, but for willful blindness, now looked precious. Painfully, unbearably precious, and there in the heavy quiet of the room lit only by a dim lamp, a truth struck him with brutal force. He had lost her long before the accident, and now he feared, with a depth he could hardly admit, that it might be far too late to find her again. Chapter 3. The Weight of Pain. Sophie woke to pain. Not one pain, but many. Layers of it, stacked and competing across every inch of her body. Her face throbbed like fire beneath the bandages. Her left ankle pulsed in a deep, relentless rhythm. Her ribs burned each time air tried to enter her lungs. Her hip felt like one enormous bruise. There was a faint memory of having woken before. Voices, a touch, a sentence drifting like wind. But it all came muddled like a dream smothered in fog. Instinct pushed her to open her eyes, yet the firm bandage across them prevented even that small attempt. Still, the effort alone unleashed a slicing agony, as though something inside her eyes had been pulled raw. A cry escaped before she could stop it. "No!" Oliver's voice came at once, steady but gentler than she had ever heard it. "Sophie, don't try to open your eyes, and don't touch the bandage. The doctor said forcing them will only make it worse. Breathe slowly, slowly." Breathing hurt. Breathing felt like punishment. She gasped, trying to obey, but each inhale tugged at something in her ribs, drawing a sharper protest from her body. "What?" The sound barely formed. "What happened to me?" The silence that followed wasn't hesitation. It was careful. "You fell," Oliver said quietly, "in the woods, and you fell hard. The doctor's been here all night." "Sophie, you're badly hurt." The memories returned in fragments. His words, the rush to escape, the cold wind, the branch lunging toward her, the horse rearing, the ground rising too fast, the pain. And then nothing. She tried turning her head, just a little. Her neck rebelled. Her ribs felt as though they splintered. Her hip screamed. A pained whimper slipped out. "Don't move," Oliver pleaded, and there was a muted panic in his voice. "Please, Sophie." "Not yet." "I need to see—" "Your eyes are bandaged," he said, coming closer. Your face was struck by thorns. The doctor cleaned everything, but you can't try to open your eyes yet. Any light would be unbearable. Sophie wanted to touch her own face, just to understand. But when she tried lifting her arm, her ribs seized with such force she nearly lost her breath. Oliver was at her side in an instant, his hand covering hers. Where does it hurt? Everywhere, she whispered, and tears slipped beneath the bandages. He drew a long, steadying breath, as if gathering the courage to continue. Sophie, it wasn't just your face. Your ankle is likely fractured. Your ribs are badly bruised. Your hip took a severe blow. You won't be able to move on your own for weeks. She felt the world narrowing around her, like the darkness already surrounding her was closing in. How long? She murmured. We don't know yet. We need the swelling to go down first, and your eyes, we can only assess them later. Silence. A heavy silence, full of everything neither of them could say. I'm thirsty, she managed. Oliver moved. She heard him pour water, the faint metal scent of the cup, the creak of the mattress as he lifted her with agonizing care. The pain surged when her body shifted. She cried out and hated the sound. I'm sorry, he said, and his voice broke. I'm sorry, I'm so sorry. She knew he wasn't apologizing for the movement. It wasn't your fault, she murmured, a reflex more than a truth. It was, he said instantly, his fingers tightening around hers. You wouldn't have fled like that if I hadn't. You wouldn't be here hurting if not for me. Sophie wanted to deny it. She couldn't. I'm tired, she whispered, letting the admission fall heavily between them. I know. He released her hand slowly. I'll stay right here. If you need anything, call, anything at all. You don't have to... I'm staying, he said again, leaving no space for argument. She sank into the mattress, lost between pain and exhaustion. Sleep found her quickly, or perhaps she fainted. She couldn't tell anymore. When she woke again, her body protested every breath, but another need, simple, human, unbearably humiliating, cut through everything else. Oliver, she called, her voice small. He answered immediately. I'm here. I need to... She stopped, burned by shame. I need to use the... She couldn't finish, but he understood. I'll fetch Mrs. Holloway, he said, his voice carefully gentle, almost respectful. Footsteps, a door, hushed murmurs. Mrs. Holloway entered with a young maid. It's all right, Your Grace, the housekeeper said, her tone almost maternal. We'll help you, slowly. And they did. It was awful. The pain, the exposure, the helplessness of a body that refused to obey. Hands supporting her because she could no longer support herself. By the time they settled her back into bed, Sophie was crying. Quiet, unguarded tears she couldn't wipe away. It gets better, dear, Mrs. Holloway murmured, smoothing the blankets. The first days are the hardest. It will ease, I promise. When Oliver returned, Sophie pretended to sleep. She couldn't face that humiliation. She didn't want him to see her, not like this, though she couldn't see him at all. But she heard the chair scrape across the floor, heard the restrained exhale he tried and failed to quiet. And then, softly, as if confessing to the dark, I'll make this right. Somehow. I'll mend what I've done. Sophie lay still in the darkness, letting one fragile thought slip through the pain. How do you stitch together someone who's already been broken apart? Chapter 4. The man who learns to serve. Oliver hadn't slept. He couldn't. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Sophie's body falling, saw the blood on the rain-soaked ground, saw the terrifying stillness. And when he managed to push that image aside, the sounds returned. Small cries she made even in sleep, pain slipping from her unaware. Now with the dim morning light filtering through the heavy curtains, he watched her. The bandages covered most of her face, leaving only the soft line of her jaw exposed. Her body lay motionless beneath the blankets, not in rest but because movement had become its own form of torment. A knock at the door. Mrs. Holloway entered carrying a porcelain tray, porridge, tea, thin slices of toast. Her eyes settled on Oliver, still in the same chair, still in the same wrinkled clothes, still looking utterly worn. "Your Grace should change," she said, firm, though not unkind. "And eat something. I can stay with the Duchess." "No," he answered at once. "I'll stay." The housekeeper studied him for a moment, not with approval but with a quiet acknowledgement, almost respectful, that something inside him had cracked, something that perhaps had finally begun to move. "Dr. Whitmore will arrive at noon," she said. "If she can eat a little when she wakes, it will help her regain strength." When Mrs. Holloway left, Oliver stared at the tray as if it were a puzzle he had never been taught to solve. Feed her, something a husband would do. Something he had never truly been. A faint groan tore through the silence. Oliver stood immediately. "Sophie, are you awake?" "The pain—" Her voice was barely a whisper. "It won't stop." Something clenched inside him, a quiet kind of desperation, the sort of helplessness no title, no influence, no wealth could fix. "The doctor left laudanum," he said, picking up the bottle. "It will help. But first, you need to eat a little. Just a little." "I can't move," she murmured. "I'll help you." He reached for the bowl, tested the temperature, then sat beside the bed. "I'll lift you slowly. Tell me if it's too much." She didn't answer, only released a short, fragile breath that might have been fear. Oliver slid an arm beneath her shoulders. His hands, made for signing contracts, not holding people, trembled. As he raised her, he felt her whole body stiffen, felt her breath seize in her chest. "Slowly," he whispered, almost to himself. "Slowly, Sophie." He eased her against his own chest, becoming her support. The tremor running through her was light, but devastating. He brought the spoon to her lips. "Small bites," he murmured. "No rush." She opened her mouth. She accepted. It hurt to watch her strain to do something so simple. Each swallow seemed to drain her strength. After half a bowl, she whispered, "Enough, please, no more." "Of course." He laid her back down with utmost care. Yet she still cried out, and the sound tore something inside him. He prepared the laudanum. She drank. Minutes later, her breathing eased. Her body softened, surrendering to the temporary relief. Oliver remained beside her, still as stone, guarding her sleep as though it was something sacred. Only when he was certain she couldn't hear him did he whisper, "I don't know where to begin, but I'll learn. I'll be here. For everything. For whatever you need." A knock. Mrs. Holloway returned with 2 maids and a steaming copper bath. "The doctor instructed that she be washed," she explained, "to prevent infection." She paused, studying Oliver. "It may not be appropriate for your Grace to remain." "I will stay," he said, rising. "And I will help." The silence that followed was heavy, not with disapproval but surprise. "Your Grace." "She is vulnerable," the housekeeper said gently. "Perhaps it would be better—" "I am her husband," Oliver said, calm and steady, "though I have never acted like one. Let me learn now." Mrs. Holloway watched him for a long moment, searching his face, and she found what she needed. "Very well," she said. "But follow my instructions exactly." What followed was a lesson in humility Oliver would never forget. Under the housekeeper's careful guidance, he learned to remove Sophie's clothing without disturbing her injuries. He learned to wash her with warm cloths, avoiding the deep bruises, to clean the skin around her bandages without pressing the cuts, to pass fresh cloth between her fingers, along her arms, over her shoulders, keeping everything as dignified as possible. And with each gesture, he discovered something new and quietly devastating. He did not know his own wife's body. Yes, they had consummated the marriage, duty required it, and sometimes he crossed the adjoining door in silence, fulfilling what was expected of a duke. But those formal encounters had never taught him the truth of the woman sleeping beyond that door. He hadn't known the weight of her in his arms, or the warmth of her skin, or that she had a tiny birthmark shaped like a crescent on her left arm, just below the elbow, or the way her breath hitched when pain crept through her ribs. And he realized it all far too late. When they finished, Sophie slept deeply, clean, cared for, with fresh bandages and her nightgown arranged with gentle hands. Mrs. Holloway smoothed the final blanket and said, "Your Grace did well. Now rest." She'll need you strong when she wakes. Oliver hesitated, as if stepping out of that room might somehow betray her. But at last, he nodded. He walked back to his own chambers, a distance he'd considered reasonable, even convenient, for 2 years. Now it felt like an abyss. A quick wash, clean clothes, a piece of bread swallowed without taste. He returned in less than an hour. When he entered, he found her sleeping. Slow breaths, hands still on the blanket. Oliver took his place again in the chair beside her, and there, watching her bandaged face, he finally understood. For 20 years he had been a duke, for 2 years a husband only in name. But for the first time in his life, he knew with absolute certainty where he belonged, at her side, and never anywhere else. Chapter 5. Between Light and Shadow. Sophie surfaced as though rising from a deep lake. It wasn't relief. It was the heavy haze laudanum left behind, a strange middle ground where pain felt distant yet alive, lurking, waiting for the slightest movement to strike again. Voices drifted nearby. Oliver. And another voice, low and steady. Dr. Whitmore. I need to examine her now that she's more stable, the doctor was saying. The injuries on her face are my greatest concern. If there's any sign of infection— There isn't, Oliver cut in, tense. I checked the bandages this morning. They're clean. A brief silence followed. You've been tending to her yourself, Your Grace? The doctor asked. Yes. Another silence, heavier. Sophie could almost picture the doctor's expression, restrained surprise, perhaps even reluctant respect. Dukes commanded. They didn't care for their own. The mattress dipped as he approached. Your Grace? Dr. Whitmore called softly. Can you hear me? Yes, she murmured. Her voice sounded distant, as if it belonged to someone else. Good. I'm going to examine you. We'll start with your ankle. It may hurt, but I'll be as gentle as I can. His cool, professional hands touched her ankle over the blanket. Even that slight pressure sent a sharp blade of pain through her. Sophie held her breath without meaning to. Still very swollen, the doctor murmured. I need a clearer look. I'll uncover your leg now. Cool air brushed her skin. Fabric shifted, then the firmer touch of examination, methodical, unavoidable. She bit her lip until she tasted metal, trying to hold back a cry. A severe sprain, Dr. Whitmore concluded. I don't suspect a fracture, but the ligaments are badly strained. She must not put weight on it for at least 3 weeks, possibly 4. 3 weeks. The number dropped like a stone in her chest. And her ribs? Oliver asked. Let's see. His hands moved, pressing along her ribs through the thin nightgown. At the second touch, Sophie couldn't help it. A sharp, broken sound slipped free. Significant contusion, he said. And from what I can tell, 2 cracked ribs. There's little to be done besides rest and avoiding any sudden movement. Deep breaths, laughter, coughing. They'll all hurt for several weeks. How long? The question left her before she could stop it. 6 weeks for proper healing, he answered. Perhaps 8. 6 weeks. The world felt smaller. He moved toward the head of the bed. Now the most delicate part, he said, his voice lowering. I'm going to remove the bandages from your face. Then I'll need you to try to open your eyes, just a little. If the pain is too much, stop. Her heart thrummed faster. The bandages loosened one layer at a time, as though someone were unveiling a hidden truth. Air touched her damaged skin. Even the slightest breeze felt like fire. The doctor made a brief, assessing sound. Clean. No sign of infection. Whoever tended these wounds was very careful. It was me, Oliver said quietly. Something warmed inside her, soft, faint, but real. The cuts are beginning to close, the doctor continued. She will have scars, especially on the eyelids, small but visible. They may lighten with time. Scars. A duchess with marks on her face. A woman in a world that judged everything by what it could see. For a heartbeat, Sophie wondered, too afraid to think the whole question. How will Oliver look at me now? Now, Your Grace, the doctor said gently. Try opening your eyes. Slowly. Only as much as you can bear. She drew in the shallow breath her ribs allowed. That alone hurt. Still, she tried. Her eyelids felt glued shut. She forced them to lift, millimeter by millimeter. Sharp pain, burning. A sliver of space. Light. Not shapes, not clear colors. Just brightness. White, intense, almost cruel. But it was light. Not the suffocating void she feared. Tears welled immediately, stinging against the fresh cuts. "It hurts," she whispered. "It hurts so much." "That's expected," the doctor said calmly. "Your eyes are extremely sensitive, but you see light, yes?" "Yes, just light. Everything blurred. Try to look at me." A moment longer. She forced her lids open again. The brightness trembled into faint shadows. A dark figure beside the bed. The doctor. Another to the side, taller, rigid, outlined in a way she would have known even without sight. Oliver. She tried to focus on him, but it was like staring through fogged glass. "I can't see properly," she said, and panic clawed at her words. "It's all hazy." "That's normal," the doctor assured her. "There's swelling, cuts, sensitivity. But your eyes respond to light and direction. That's an excellent sign. I see no indication of internal damage." "It will return?" Oliver asked. "Immediate. Taut." "I believe so," the doctor replied. "With time. 3, perhaps 4 weeks until her vision clears. Until then she must keep her eyes covered most of the time. Bright light is the enemy for now." Sophie closed her eyes again, relief and despair knotting together. She wasn't blind, but she wasn't whole either. The bandages returned, layer after layer, bringing her back to the darkness that had felt like a threat, but now, strangely, felt like shelter. "You can rest your eyes now," the doctor said kindly. "You did well." Oliver exhaled deeply. "And the rest?" he asked. "How long will she remain like this?" "The ankle. 3 to 4 weeks without weight," the doctor explained. "The ribs. 6 to 8 weeks until the pain truly eases. The eyes. 3 to 4 weeks until vision stabilizes. During that time, she'll need help with nearly everything. Walking, sitting, eating, even moving safely around her own room." Each word was another weight. Dependence, vulnerability, time. "I understand," Oliver said at last. "I'll handle it." The doctor gathered his tools, gave further instructions to Oliver and Mrs. Holloway, and finally left, taking the room's noise with him, leaving its new reality ringing louder. Sophie heard the door close, footsteps returned to the bed, the mattress dipped beside her. "I know it sounds like a sentence far too long," Oliver said quietly. 6 weeks, 8, relying on me. On the man who failed you for 2 years. She didn't speak. She didn't know how to lie to that. "I can't erase the past," he continued, "but I can decide what I do with the days ahead. I can show up, or I can run. And Sophie, I won't run this time." She felt his hand touch hers, hesitant, almost asking permission. "The doctor said 3 weeks, 6, 8, Oliver went on, releasing a shaky breath. "To me, it doesn't matter how long. I'll stay. For every meal, every bandage, every difficult night. I won't leave you to the house and hide in my study." Sophie wanted to tell him she didn't believe it, that this was only guilt, that when she could see again, when she could stand again, things would return to normal. But the truth was, she wanted, desperately, to believe him. Her fingers moved, tentative and small, and closed around his. A fragile gesture, but hers. "All right," he murmured, as though that slight squeeze were the first true light after years of shadow. "Then we'll start here, one day at a time." In the forced darkness behind the bandages, Sophie allowed herself one question she would never say aloud. What if, in this space between light and shadow, they finally learned to see each other? It was a dangerous hope, but that morning, not even pain nor fear managed to chase it away. Chapter 6. The Distance That Shrinks. In the days that followed, Oliver discovered something. Caring for someone was an act of surrender. He surrendered to her time, not his own, to her pain, not his preferences, to her pace, slow, hesitant, at times maddening, instead of the firm, controlled rhythm he had always imposed on everything. And strangely, there was freedom in that. The freedom to stop being only the impeccable, distant, irreproachable Duke, and simply be a man beside a wounded woman. On the afternoon of the 5th day since the accident, he was changing the bandages on Sophie's face, with hands that no longer shook quite so much. Mrs. Holloway had taught him well how to clean without pressing, how to spread the cool salve without touching the cuts themselves, how to wrap the cloth tight enough to protect, but soft enough not to hurt. The faint scent of herbs mixed with the gentle soap they used for her. Sophie lay still, the tension in her body apparent but cooperative. She had learned, at least in this small island of pain, to trust him, a small victory Oliver guarded, like something fragile and rare. "Almost finished," he murmured as he adjusted the final layer. "Is it too tight?" "No," she answered. Her voice was still rough but steadier than in the first days. "It's fine." He stepped back to assess his work. The bandages were clean, straight, secure. They wouldn't earn Mrs. Holloway's praise, but they wouldn't cause harm. "Thank you," Sophie said softly. Something clenched in his chest. She was thanking him for something that never should have been a favor, for care that should always have been hers. Perhaps not like this, not under these circumstances, but in 100 other moments when he simply hadn't been there. "You don't need to thank me," he replied, putting the jars away. "It's my duty and my—" He hesitated. "My privilege." She turned her face slightly toward his voice, a gesture she'd begun to repeat often as if sound had become her eyes. Privilege. Oliver sat in the chair beside the bed, a place that in these days had become almost an extension of his own body. "Yes," he said plainly, "because for the first time in our marriage I feel I'm truly at your side, not just a formal presence to your left at a dinner table, but here." The silence that followed wasn't hostile. It was thoughtful. "You've changed," she said at last. There was no accusation in it, no forgiveness either, just the observation of someone who had learned to watch in silence. "I had to change," he answered. "Either I did, or I would lose you completely, and I've discovered that the idea of losing you is unbearable." "Why?" Her question was gentle but precise. "You spent 2 years losing me slowly. Why is it different now?" Oliver closed his eyes for a moment. When he answered, he didn't try to dress the truth in pretty words. "Because it's easy to ignore what is always there," he said. "Easy to believe there will be time later, that today's silence can be fixed tomorrow. I lived as if you were guaranteed, as if you had nowhere to go." He swallowed hard. "But when I saw you lying in the woods, when I thought I might never hear your voice again, I understood that later doesn't exist. That I may already have passed every deadline." Sophie took her time before speaking again. "And if I hadn't fallen," she asked quietly, "if I'd come back from that ride unharmed, just sad but whole, would you have changed?" The question struck where it hurt most. He didn't answer at once, long enough for her to know the truth before he spoke it. "I'd like to believe that someday I would have woken up," he said at last. "But if I'm honest, probably not. I would have gone back to my study, to reports, to the routine that's always shielded me from everything. I would have let our argument cool until it turned into just another silence between us. Being a duke is simple. We're taught early which masks to wear. Being a man or being a husband is something else entirely, something I never truly learned. I'm not saying this as an excuse, Sophie. I'm saying it because it's the truth." Something tightened in her throat. "So I owe my gratitude to the fall." There was bitterness in her voice, but also a tired sort of irony. "I had to break for you to finally see me?" "No." He searched for her hand over the blankets. When he found it, he enclosed it gently. "You should never have had to bleed to catch your own husband's attention. You shouldn't have had to almost die for me to grasp the worth of your presence. There is no merit in the accident." "Only blame in me." Sophie's fingers answered with a light squeeze, small but deliberate. "I'm afraid," she admitted in a thin voice. "Afraid that when I'm better, when I can walk, when I can see, you'll go back to who you were. That all of this will be just remorse, guilt for a while. And then—" She didn't finish. She didn't need to. Oliver felt the truth of it settle over him like a deserved sentence. "I'm afraid of that too," he said quietly. She seemed to flinch just a little. "I'm afraid that when the urgency fades, I'll fall back into old habits without noticing, that my study will become my coward's refuge again, that I'll betray everything I'm saying now, not out of malice, but out of habit. And that terrifies me." He tightened his hold on her hand, anchoring himself there. "But I don't want it to happen," he went on. "So if it does, I promise you this. Don't accept it in silence. Don't shrink. Don't disappear again." He drew a breath. "Shout at me if you have to. Tell me I'm wrong. Knock on my study door. Do whatever it takes to drag me out of there." Sophie let out a sound that was almost a laugh, and even though it hurt her ribs, she couldn't quite stop it. "The Duke of Ashworth is asking me to confront him." "The man is," he replied with a rare softness. "Not the title. I want you to exist fully, Sophie. In this house, in this marriage, in my life. I want you to take the space that's yours, not the narrow corner where I shoved you." Another pause. Then, with a hint of challenge, "I'll hold you to that." "Please do," he said without hesitation. "I want you to." A knock at the door. Mrs. Holloway entered with the dinner tray. Soup, bread, tea. "The Duchess needs to eat more," she said briskly. "The body doesn't mend on air, Your Grace." Sophie sighed but didn't protest. Oliver took the bowl. By now he knew how, the exact angle to raise her, the place where the pillow best supported her ribs, the steady pace of the spoon. "Open," he asked softly. She obeyed. He fed her slowly. When she turned her face slightly away after half a bowl, he didn't insist. "Later," he said, setting the spoon aside. "In smaller portions. Dr. Whitmore said that's best." Mrs. Holloway gave him a brief look that was almost approving, then left in silence. "You're getting good at this," Sophie remarked. "I had an excellent teacher," he replied, "and a reason that won't allow me to do it poorly." She smiled. It was a small smile, but real. Something in Oliver eased and expanded at once, in a way that both frightened and steadied him. "May I ask you something?" she said, hesitant. "Anything. Tell me what it's like out there, the garden, the sky. What's happening beyond this room? I feel as if the world has disappeared." He glanced toward the window instinctively, though she couldn't see it. "It rained again last night," he began. "This morning, when I opened the window a little, the garden looked washed clean. The tulips you ordered planted last spring are open now. Red, yellow, some almost orange. I'd never really looked at them before. They're more beautiful than I remembered." She turned her face a little toward where the window was, as if trying to break through the darkness. "You noticed the tulips?" "I did." He smiled, even though she couldn't see. "And I noticed a swallow's nest on the east cornice. 3 chicks. The noise they make at dawn is oddly comforting." "You open the window, sir, at dawn?" she asked, timid curiosity in her voice. "Every day," he said. "Just a little, so the air can come in without too much light. I thought you might like to breathe something that isn't only this room." Sophie didn't answer at once, but he heard the subtle shift in her breathing, a trace of relief. "Go on," she said finally. "Tell me more." And Oliver did. He told her about the cook, who had baked honey bread and set a slice aside for her grace when the doctor allows it. He spoke of Timothy, who came every day to ask if there was any news of the Duchess. He described the wildflowers Mrs. Holloway placed on the small table, never roses, because she knew Sophie found them too pompous. As he spoke, Oliver realized something simple and staggering. He was learning to see. Not just tulips and swallows, but people, gestures, the small movements of a world that had always circled around him while he walked through it blind, shielded by his own routine. When Sophie finally drifted to sleep, not under laudanum, but from sheer exhaustion, Oliver remained in the chair watching the white bandages over her eyes. And in the middle of the guilt and fear, he felt a strange kind of gratitude, not for the pain, never for the pain, but for the unexpected chance to begin again, for the rare undeserved opportunity to one day become the husband she had always deserved, and that he until now had never known how to be. Chapter 7. When the heart recognizes. Sophie woke with less pain. It was still there, in the steady throb of her ankle, in the complaint of her ribs with every deeper breath, in the raw sensitivity of her face beneath the bandages. But there is a difference between pain that consumes and pain that coexists. The first devours, the second becomes a stubborn presence one learns to negotiate with. In the last few days, Sophie had been living with the second, and there was another change, far more dangerous. She woke not fearing the day, but waiting for it. Because Oliver would be there. For 14 days, counted almost against her will, he had kept every promise. He fed her 3 times a day, changed her bandages with hands growing steadier. Read to her every afternoon, poetry, novels, even a treatise on botany that went on for pages about lichens and made her laugh, asking if the author had nothing better to do. He described the world outside with care, the garden, the sky, the servants, and more than anything he stayed. Not just present in the room but attentive. He had learned to notice when her pain increased even before she tried to hide it. He heard the change in her breathing, the way her fingers tightened in the sheets, the pauses between her words, and meanwhile the dukedom continued to function. Burton, always discreet, always efficient, brought brief reports every morning, handling what he could on his own and consulting Oliver only when strictly necessary. Oliver had discovered, with a humbled kind of surprise, that the world did not collapse if he wasn't at the center of everything. Not everything was urgent. Not everything demanded his immediate hand. And it was there, beside Sophie, that he began to see what truly mattered. It was everything she had silently wished for over 2 years, and precisely because of that, it terrified her. "Good morning?" His voice reached her before the light did, gentle the way it had become only with her. "Did you sleep well?" "Better," she replied. The pain eased. "Dr. Whitmore is coming today. It's been a week since his last visit. He may have good news about your ankle." She heard the mattress dip as he sat at the edge of the bed, then the soft brush of his fingers as he checked the bandages. "They're clean," he said. "I can change them after breakfast if you'd like." "I would," she answered. "I trust your hands." He drew a quiet breath, as if that simple sentence weighed more than she knew. He lifted her with practiced care, propping her against the pillows. The movement had become routine, yet it still left her acutely aware of how close he was, and of how completely she trusted him not to let her fall. "Porridge or eggs today?" he asked. "Eggs." She made a tiny face. "I've had enough porridge to survive a particularly cruel winter." His laugh, low, unpolished, nothing like his practiced social chuckle in drawing rooms, warmed the air. "I'll tell the kitchen. And toast with jam?" "Please." When he left, he took with him the sound of his presence. The silence that followed was no longer hostile, but it wasn't neutral either. It left far too much room for thought, and the most insistent thought was the most dangerous one. She was beginning to shape her days around him, not around the impeccable, distant Duke he'd once been, but around this man, the one who fell asleep, worn out, in the chair beside her bed, who had described a sunset to her as if it were poetry, who had become a steady, almost tender presence. This man, she realized with a start, did not leave her indifferent. When he returned, the tray clinked softly in his hands. She was so quiet that he remarked, "A penny for your thoughts." Sophie hesitated. She could lie. She could dodge. Instead, she chose the question that burned. "Oliver, may I ask you something difficult?" "Always," he replied, without a trace of irony. "Are you here for me?" She drew in a slow breath. "Or for guilt?" The silence that followed was heavy. For a moment, she almost told him to forget she'd asked, to not answer. But then he spoke, and there was no sign he was searching for an escape. "At the beginning, for guilt," he admitted. The honesty hurt more than any pretty excuse might have. In those first days I stayed because I feared I had destroyed you, because it was my duty not to abandon you after what happened. She heard the faint rustle of fabric as he moved closer, felt his hand reach for hers. But now I stay because I want to, he went on, because in these days I've discovered who you are. Not the silent duchess at my left at dinner, but the woman who plants tulips because she finds roses pretentious, who laughs at treatises on lichens, who talks about poetry as if she truly believes it can change something, who remains kind even when she's in pain. Something tightened in Sophie's throat. Tears pressed hotly behind her injured eyelids. And if, when I'm better, she ventured, when I can walk, take care of myself, you realize you don't actually like who I am when I'm no longer necessary. He gave her fingers a gentle squeeze. Then I'll spend every day proving that I do, he answered without hesitation. Sophie, I don't stay here because you need me. I stay because I've realized that I need you. Before she could react, believe, doubt, or retreat, a knock sounded at the door. Mrs. Holloway entered with breakfast, followed by Dr. Whitmore. The ankle came first. Careful touches, questions, light pressure that still drew small sounds of pain, though less than before. Swelling has reduced considerably, the doctor said. I believe that in another week you may begin to put a bit of weight on it, with caution and never without support. Then came the ribs. They still hurt, but breathing, though limited, no longer felt like a battle with every inhale. Healing well, Your Grace, he concluded. There will be discomfort for some time yet, but nothing beyond what we expect. And my eyes? Sophie asked, her voice a little tighter. The doctor removed the bandages with care. The touch of air against her skin was more discomfort than pain now. Open your eyes, Your Grace. Slowly, he instructed. Sophie obeyed. At first, only brightness, a wash of light. Slowly, shapes began to emerge. The frame of the window, the dark blur of the chair, the figure of the doctor. And then, beside him, another outline. Oliver, still a little blurred, his edges softened but visible. The dark of his hair, the faint shadows beneath his eyes, the tension in his shoulders as he leaned toward her. He was thinner, but still handsome. He had always been handsome. But now there was something new, worry, tenderness, vulnerability, that made him more than simply attractive. It made him human. I can see you, she whispered, emotion thick in her throat. Not perfectly, but I see you. The smile that lit his face was so warm that not even her hazy vision could dim it. Excellent, the doctor declared, pleased. Your sight will return gradually. In a week or two it should be nearly normal. Avoid bright light as we've discussed. Darkness returned as the bandages were replaced, but this time Sophie didn't feel herself plunged into the same emptiness. Oliver's image remained clear inside her. After the doctor left, the room settled into its slower rhythm again. What are you thinking? Oliver asked in a softer tone. She reached out, searching until she found his hand. That, perhaps, she began carefully, perhaps I'm ready to try. To trust. Not completely. Not yet. But like a little, he laced his fingers with hers as if holding something precious he didn't want to startle. That's all I ask, he said, a little at a time. Let me show you, day after day, that I won't disappear when the pain does. That morning, that afternoon, that night, in every spoonful of soup, in every page read in a quiet voice, in every description of Swallow's feet on the cornice, Sophie allowed herself to feel the tenderness in his gestures, the sincerity in the way he watched her, the slow, solid change seeping between them like light through the cracks of a door. And before sleep finally claimed her, a soft but insistent certainty formed. Perhaps it wasn't only about him learning to see her. It was also about her allowing herself to be seen, with pain, with weakness, with scars, and still believe she could be chosen. Perhaps what was beginning to grow there between bandages and promises had a name she didn't yet dare to speak, but for the first time in a very long while, her heart felt ready to recognize it. Chapter 8. The Man Who Chooses to Stay. Oliver was in his study for the first time in 3 weeks, not because he wished to be, but because the desk looked ready to collapse under contracts, letters, and decisions he could not ignore forever. Mrs. Holloway had insisted that Sophie slept deeply under the night's laudanum, and that he should use those hours to tend to urgent matters. He had agreed, reluctantly. Now, seated behind the mahogany desk, he stared at the papers as if they were written in a language long forgotten. The numbers, the lands, the renovations, all of it belonged to the man he had been before, to the diligent, impeccable, distant Duke. He read a letter from the northern steward twice before the words made sense. But his mind kept wandering always back to the room across the corridor. Was Sophie comfortable? Would she need water? What if she woke and reached for someone who wasn't there? He forced himself to sign the document. A knock at the door. "Come in," he said, harsher than intended. Burton stepped inside with more papers. He had served Oliver for years, but now there was something new in his expression, a difficult mixture of surprise and respect. "These require your signature, Your Grace," he said, after a brief hesitation. "And, if I may, it's good to see you in the study, even if only for a few hours." "A few hours?" Oliver repeated. Burton wet his lips, choosing his words with care. "The entire household has noticed Your Grace's devotion to the Duchess." He bowed his head, not from shame, but from discreet reverence. "It is not criticism. On the contrary, the staff remark that they have never seen her smile so much." A pause. Then softly, "And it was never a secret that Her Grace was always kind to us, but light? No. That is new." Oliver felt his heart falter for a beat. They had never seen the Duchess smile. Light. 2 years. 2 years of marriage in which even the servants had known she was unhappy, and he had refused to see it. When Burton left, the silence pressed in hard. Oliver tried to return to the papers. He couldn't. He pushed them aside and rose, crossing the corridor like a man who suddenly realizes he has been far from what matters far too long. He climbed the stairs quickly. When he opened the door, he found Sophie awake. "Oliver?" she asked, with a smile he could hear. "I thought you were working." "I was," he said, closing the door behind him, "but I can't keep my mind on the papers. I keep thinking about whether you're well." The chair, already an extension of him, moved closer to the bed. He took her hand. "Sophie, I need to tell you something." "What is it?" He drew a steadying breath. "Burton said the whole house sees the change, that you've been smiling. And it reminded me that for 2 years I left you so unhappy that even those who hardly saw you knew. And I didn't. Or I did, and refused to let it touch me." She began to speak, but he lifted a hand. "Let me finish." He wrapped her fingers between his. "I could blame my upbringing, the way they teach us that dukes must keep distance, that marriages like ours are alliances, not affections. All of that is true, but none of it is an excuse. I could have chosen to truly look at you, and I didn't." His voice softened. "I'm choosing now." Silence settled gently. "And I want you to understand," he continued, "I'm not here because you're injured, not out of guilt, but because I've discovered who you are." The air between them seemed to still. "Oliver," she whispered, "I'm afraid to believe it completely, afraid that when I'm well again you'll return to who you were." He leaned closer, not touching her, but letting their breaths share the same space. "When you are well," he said, steady and low, "I want to walk with you. I want to see you strong. I want to hear you laugh without pain. I want to be your ally, not your distant observer. And, Sophie, there's something more." He hesitated just long enough for her to feel the weight of his confession. "I'm in love with you, not with the perfect Duchess I pretended to see. With you, the woman who was in front of me all this time and whom I was foolish enough to overlook." The silence that followed had shape and depth. Then Sophie let go of his hand. Oliver's stomach dropped. But then she lifted both hands and reached for his face. tracing his jaw, feeling the roughness of unshaven skin, learning every line as if mapping a new land. "So am I," she breathed. "I'm letting myself fall in love with you, with the small things you do without noticing, with the way you read to me, with how gently you still change the bandages, with the man you are becoming." Her hands slid to his shoulders, tentative, warm. "But promise me, when I can walk outside without support, when my eyes can look at the world without pain, when this bed stops being the center of my days, don't go back to losing me. I don't know if I could survive that again." He caught her hands in his. "I promise. And if I ever falter, I want you to confront me. Remind me of us." Sophie nodded, small but certain. "May I?" he whispered, leaning in. She allowed it. The kiss was soft, barely a sigh. A touch full of promises and care. The kiss of a man who had learned late but truly the weight and beauty of loving someone. When he drew back, she was crying silently. "Did I hurt you?" he asked, alarmed. "No," she said, smiling through tears. "It was exactly what I needed." He gathered her gently, mindful of every rib, every bruise. Sophie rested her head against his chest and let herself be held. "No matter how long it takes," Oliver murmured into her hair, "I'll be here. And when you're well, I'll still be here, because I've discovered where my place is." "Where?" she whispered, half asleep. "By your side." And as he held her while she allowed herself to be held, Oliver understood he wasn't simply caring for an injured wife. He was building something new, something that did not come from duty but from choice. The choice to stay, the choice to begin again, the choice of her every single day. Chapter 9. When the light returns. Sophie woke and even before opening her eyes, tried to move her ankle. Slowly, testing. Pain came, but it was no longer the vicious kind that held her captive. It was contained, familiar. She flexed her toes, drew a small circle in the air. She could do it. 4 weeks since the accident. 4 weeks that felt somehow like both an eternity and a single day stretched thin. 4 weeks of darkness, of pain, of dependence. But also, and that still amazed her, 4 weeks of discovery. She had discovered who Oliver was beneath the armor of his title. She had discovered who she became when she stopped shrinking into herself. She had discovered that a marriage could be rebuilt, even after nearly collapsing. "Good morning?" Oliver's voice, so familiar now it felt like part of the room itself. "How are you feeling?" "Different," she replied, without adornment. "My ankle. I moved it." He came to her at once, sitting on the edge of the bed. "Did it hurt?" "It did. But it's a pain I can bear." "Dr. Whitmore said we could try today," he reminded her, "if you feel ready." Sophie drew a deep breath. Her ribs hardly protested. "I'm ready." Oliver helped her sit up. The movement was almost a practiced dance by now, his arm firm behind her back, pillows shifted and arranged until she murmured, "That's good." Then, with utmost care, he began unwinding the bandages from her face. Light slipped in little by little. Sophie blinked. Her eyes were still sensitive, but the sting was no longer unbearable. When she managed to open them fully, she saw him, Oliver, no longer blurred, clear, whole. Dark eyes resting on her with a tenderness she would once have thought impossible. The line of his jaw softened by short beard, faint shadows beneath his eyes, quiet evidence of nights spent watching over her. "I can see you," she whispered, overcome. Clearly. His smile seemed to bring its own light into the room. "And I can finally see you looking at me," he answered. He lifted his hand and let his fingers trace the marks the accident had left. Fine lines along her eyelids, small pale streaks on her cheekbones. "They're visible," Sophie said, not in regret, just stating a fact. "They are," he agreed, "and they're beautiful. They say that you stayed, that you came back, that you're here." He bent and kissed each scar, one by one, with the reverence of someone touching something sacred. "Now," he said, leaning back just enough to meet her gaze. "Let's try to get you on your feet." Sophie's heart sped up. Fear, anxiety, hope. Oliver moved to her side, offering both arms. "Slowly," he murmured. "I'll hold you. If it's too much, we stop." She took his arms and, with exquisite care, began shifting her weight. Her legs trembled. 4 weeks of stillness had a cost. Her ankle protested as her foot reached for the floor, but it held. "I can bear it," she said, surprised. "It hurts, but I can bear it." "A little more," he encouraged. "When you're ready, lift yourself." Sophie drew a breath, tightened her grip on his arms, and stood. Her legs wobbled, her ankle burned, but she was standing. For the first time in 4 weeks, she was on her feet. Tears came before she could stop them, not from pain, but from a relief so deep it felt like something unknotted inside her. "I did it," her voice shook. "Oliver, I did it." He held her firmly, taking much of her weight, but she could feel the floor beneath her. Solid, real. "You did," he echoed, unable to hide his pride. "You're extraordinary, Sophie." For a while they stayed like that, she upright, he beside her, steadying, witnessing. Then slowly he began to guide her. "There's something I want to show you," he said gently. "Do you think you can make it to the window? I'll be with you." Sophie nodded. Step by careful step they crossed the short distance. Each movement hurt, but each one was a victory. When they reached the window, Oliver helped her rest against the sill and stood behind her, supporting her. "Look," he said, gesturing toward the road that led to the village. She followed his hand. She saw carts, men carrying wood, bundles of tiles, coils of rope, the ring of distant hammering, voices, unusual activity for that hour. "What's happening?" she murmured. Oliver drew a breath. "Do you remember the day of the accident?" he asked. "What you came to tell me in my study?" The memory returned, raw, papers in her hands, words swallowed, humiliation, her flight. "The village school," she said slowly, "the roof giving way, the children in the cold, and you—" "I cut you off," he finished, regret thick in his voice. "Told you I didn't understand your insistence on those matters. Said your presence at my side when requested was enough." "Yes." He turned her gently in his arms until she could see his face. "I didn't throw your papers away," he confessed. "They were in that drawer." He tilted his head in the direction of the study. "I read every line afterward. Everything you'd written was right, and I was too proud to listen." Sophie's eyes burned in a way that had nothing to do with her injuries. "The repairs?" she began. "They're being done," he said. "The school is being rebuilt. New roof, windows that close, proper benches. The tenants' cottages are having their roofs mended before winter. The well is being cleaned. The bridge rebuilt in stone." His thumb brushed away the tears that spilled over. "The very things you tried to show me that day." She pressed a hand to her chest, as if holding her heart in place. "Why now?" "Because you were right," he answered simply. "And because, while caring for you, I realized I hadn't truly seen anyone. Not you, not them. I managed land, not lives." He rested his forehead against hers. "And because I didn't want the change to stay trapped inside this room. I needed to change as a husband, as a man, and as a duke." Sophie closed her eyes for a moment, letting it sink in. "Will you go with me to the school?" she asked, her voice still unsteady. "When I'm stronger?" "We will," he said, without a trace of doubt. So they know who spoke for them first. She drew him into a kiss full of gratitude, of forgiveness, and of something she at last allowed herself to name: love. When they parted, he lifted her back into his arms and carried her to the bed with his usual care. "That's enough for today," he decided, arranging the pillows. "Tomorrow a few more steps. Today you've gone far enough." "We've gone far enough," she corrected, catching his hand. He smiled. "We've gone far enough?" Together. 2 weeks later, Sophie was walking. There was still pain here and there. She still sometimes leaned on the elegant cane Oliver had ordered for her. Light, polished wood, with tiny tulips carved into the handle. But she walked. That afternoon, he took her into the garden. The sun smiled without being harsh. The spring tulips had given way to roses, and Sophie, with amused reluctance, admitted that some of them truly were breathtaking. "May I show you something?" Oliver asked, offering his arm. "You may." He led her along a gravel path to a corner that had once been nothing more than forgotten ground. Now new beds had been planted there, daisies, lavender, buttercups, simple, cheerful flowers without grandeur. "I had them planted while you were recovering," he explained. "Flowers like the ones you've always preferred. I wanted you to have something waiting for you out here." Sophie felt her chest tighten, not with pain, but with feeling. "You did this for me?" "For us," he corrected, curling his arm carefully around her waist. "For this new life we're building. Not the old one, proper and empty, but another, something truer." She lifted her face to the light, the same light she had almost lost, now more precious than ever. "Thank you," she said simply, "for not giving up, for listening, for choosing to change." "Thank you for giving me a second chance," he replied. "And for not leaving when I least deserved you to stay." They stood there, among unassuming blossoms and the scent of lavender, in the quiet gentleness of late afternoon, and Sophie realized, with a calmness she had never known, that she had found something she'd never truly had before. Not just a duke, not just a husband, but a man who saw her, who treated her voice as something that mattered, who seemed every morning to choose again to love her better than he had the day before. And in that golden light, with scars that were now part of her, and an ankle that still reminded her of what she had endured, Sophie Harwick felt, for the first time in many years, whole. Epilogue. 8 months later, Sophie woke to sunlight spilling through the wide windows of the master bedroom, the bedroom she now shared with Oliver, not by duty, by choice. The space beside her was empty, but still warm. She placed a hand over her belly, already gently rounded beneath her linen nightdress. 3 months, a new life growing there, born not only of a union of bodies, but of a marriage reborn. She smiled. She knew exactly where he was. With steady, painless steps, she descended the staircase and found Oliver in the garden, crouched beside the lavender beds, examining a sprout with the sort of focus he once reserved for contracts. When he saw her, his smile came easily, as if he'd simply been waiting for her to arrive. "Good morning," he said, rising. He brushed soil from his tunic and laid a hand instinctively over her belly. "And how are the two of you?" "Quite well," Sophie replied, covering his hand with hers. "Though this little one seems to have inherited your stubbornness, didn't let me sleep." He laughed and leaned down to her stomach. "We'll make a deal, little one," he murmured. "Let your mother rest a bit." She rolled her eyes, but her smile betrayed her. "You remember today as the opening," she teased. "How could I forget?" He slipped an arm around her waist. "The school is everything we should have been from the start." A few hours later, Sophie stood before it. The school was not grand, but it was solid and bright. A new roof, wide windows, polished wooden benches, a chalkboard freshly painted. Shelves of books waited for small hands. 15 children watched her, clean faces, clothes tidied for the occasion. Sophie knelt before the smallest child, a girl of 6 with crooked braids. "What's your name?" "Mary, Your Grace." "Mary is a beautiful name." Sophie gently touched one braid. "Can you read yet?" Mary shook her head. "Not yet, Your Grace, but Mama says I will now, because of you." Something tightened in Sophie's chest, not pain, but a profound, steady joy. "Then promise me something," she said, taking the child's small hands. "When you finish your first book, come tell me which one it was. I'll want to know." Mary nodded with solemn pride, as if accepting a great mission. When Sophie rose, carefully protecting her belly, Oliver was already at her side, offering his arm. The parson gave a speech, parents offered their thanks, and the children scattered to explore their new classroom. And standing beside him, one hand linked with Oliver's and the other resting over her child, Sophie felt something she had never known so fully. She was a duchess, a wife, a woman. But above all, she was someone whose choices changed lives. Someone seen, heard, valued. Later, back at Harwick, fatigue weighed softly on her shoulders. Oliver noticed in the subtle way she leaned a little more against him. "Would you like to rest?" he asked. "I want to go to the garden first." She smiled. "Then I promise I'll lie down." They sat on the bench among the lavender and daisies, in the quiet corner he'd had prepared for her. Sophie rested her head against his shoulder. His hand settled naturally over her belly. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what?" "For listening. For acting. For the school, for the tenants, for Mrs. Turner." She looked at him, gentle and certain. "For being the man I choose every day." He kissed her, slow, tender, full of everything that apologies and vows alone could never express. "And you are the woman who made me want to be worthy of that choice," he said, voice thick. "Soon we'll be three." "Three," Sophie echoed, smiling. "A real family." The sun was lowering, staining the sky gold and crimson. The scent of simple flowers mingled with the smell of damp earth, and Oliver thought, not for the first time, that he had come so close to losing everything by his own blindness. But he hadn't lost it, because she had survived, because he had changed, because since then both of them had chosen, day after day, gesture after gesture, to rebuild what had once been broken. "I love you," he said simply. "I love you too." She laughed softly. "Even when you wake up unbearably sentimental?" "Especially when I wake up unbearably sentimental." Her laughter filled the garden, a sound he had learned to seek and finally to deserve. And there, surrounded by lavender and the last tulips of the season, with a new life growing between them and the quiet certainty that the future would arrive in shared steps, Oliver Harwick understood, fully and forever. Titles fade. Estates change hands. But the love he had chosen, for her with her, would always be his true legacy. And as he gave Sophie's hand a gentle squeeze, he knew that for the first time in his life, he was exactly where he was meant to be. In the heart of the woman he had once almost failed to see, and who was now unmistakably his home. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel, so you never miss the next chapters we bring to life. Thank you for watching.